There is a pervasive assumption in the human experience that true freedom is found in autonomy. We tend to believe that to be fully alive, we must define reality on our own terms. We assume that the ability to decide what is good and what is evil for ourselves is the ultimate height of existence. But this assumption, when tested against the narrative of history, often leads not to flourishing, but to fracture. This tension is at the very heart of the first book of the Bible, Genesis. The book is designed in two distinct movements. The first movement, covering chapters 1 through 11, tells the story of God and the whole world. The second movement, from chapter 12 to 50, zooms in to tell the story of God and just one man, Abraham, and his family. These two parts are connected by a critical hinge story at the beginning of chapter 12. This design gives us a clue as to how to understand the message of the book as a whole. To understand the human condition, we must look at how the story begins. It starts with God taking disorder and darkness and bringing out of it order, beauty, and goodness. He makes a world where life can flourish. Into this world, God places creatures called humans, or in Hebrew, Adam. He makes them in His image. This is not just a description of their nature, but of their role and purpose. Humans are made to be reflections of God's character out into the world. They are appointed as God's representatives to rule His world on His behalf. In this context, ruling does not mean domination. It means to harness the world's potential to care for it and to create an environment where even more life can flourish. God gives these humans a blessing. He places them in a garden which serves as the starting point for building this new world. But here, the core assumption about autonomy is put to the test. The humans have a choice about how they are going to build this world. This choice is represented by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Up until this moment, God has provided and defined what is good and what is not good. But now God gives humans the dignity and the freedom of a choice. The question is simple but profound. Are they going to trust God's definition of good and evil? Or are they going to seize autonomy and define good and evil for themselves? The stakes are incredibly high. To rebel against God is to embrace death because it involves turning away from the giver of life Himself. This reality is represented by the tree of life. Into this high-stakes environment enters a mysterious figure. A snake appears in the story. It is given no introduction other than being a creature God made. It becomes clear, however, that this creature is in rebellion against God. It wants to lead the humans into that same rebellion and toward their death. The snake tells a different story about the tree and the choice. It claims that seizing the knowledge of good and evil will not bring death. Instead, the snake argues that autonomy is the way to life and the way to become like God themselves. The irony here is tragic. We know the humans are already like God. They were made to reflect God's image from the very beginning. They already possess what they are trying to seize. But the lure of autonomy is strong. Instead of trusting God, the humans seize autonomy. They take the knowledge of good and evil for themselves. In an instant, the story spirals out of control. The assumption that autonomy leads to freedom is immediately shattered. The first casualty is human relationships. The man and the woman suddenly realize how vulnerable they are. Trust evaporates. They can no longer trust each other, so they make clothes and hide their bodies from one another. The second casualty is the intimacy between God and humans. That connection is lost. They run and hide from God. When God finds them, they do not take responsibility. They start a game of blame shifting about who rebelled first. At this point, the narrative pauses. through a series of short poems, God declares the tragic consequences of these actions. God first speaks to the snake. He tells it that despite its apparent victory, it is destined for defeat. It will eat dust. God then makes a promise. He says that one day a seed or a descendant will come from the woman. This descendant is going to deliver a lethal strike to the snake's head. This sounds like great news. However, this victory will come with a cost. The snake, too, will deliver a lethal strike to the descendant's heel as it is being crushed. It is a mysterious promise of a wounded victor. In the flow of the story, this is an act of God's grace. The humans have just rebelled, and yet God promises to rescue them. But this promise does not erase the consequences of their decision. God informs them that every aspect of their life together at home and in the field will now be fraught with grief and pain because of the rebellion. This path ultimately leads to their death. From here, we might hope that humanity learns its lesson. We might assume that seeing the cost of autonomy would drive us back to trust. But the story spirals downward. Chapters 3 through 11 trace the widening ripple effect of the rebellion. We see human relationships fracturing at every level. We see this in the story of two brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain is consumed by jealousy of his brother to the point that he wants to murder him. God warns him not to give in to this temptation. But Cain, operating on his own definition of what is right, ignores the warning. He murders his brother in the field. Cain then goes on to build a city where violence and oppression reign. This trajectory is epitomized in the story of a man named Lamech. He is the first man in the Bible to have more than one wife. He accumulates them like property. He then sings a short song boasting about how he is more violent and vengeful than Cain ever was. The autonomy to define right and wrong has turned into a license for brutality. The spiral continues with an odd story about the sons of God. This could refer to evil angelic beings, or perhaps ancient kings who claimed descent from the gods. Like Lamech, they acquired as many wives as they wanted and produced the Nephilim, great warriors of old. Regardless of the specific interpretation, the point remains the same. Humans are building kingdoms that fill God's world with violence and corruption. God's response is not detached anger. It is grief. We are told that God is broken with grief because humanity is ruining his good world and ruining each other. Out of a passion to protect the goodness of his world, he washes it clean of humanity's evil with a great flood. But God protects one blameless human named Noah, along with his family. He commissions Noah as a new Adam. He repeats the divine blessing and sends him out into the world. Here our hopes rise again. Maybe a fresh start is what humanity needs to fix the problem of the human heart. But Noah fails too. And significantly, he also fails in a garden. He plants a vineyard and gets drunk out of his mind. Then one of his sons, Ham, does something shameful to his father in the tent. We are left with the image of our new Adam, naked and ashamed, just like the first. The problem of the human heart persists. The downward spiral begins again. This time it leads to the foundation of the city of Babylon. The people of ancient Mesopotamia come together around a new technology, the brick. This allows them to make cities and towers bigger and faster than anyone has ever done before. They want to build a new kind of tower that will reach up to the gods. They want to make a great name for themselves. It is an image of human rebellion and arrogance. It is the rebellion of the garden, but now writ large across an entire society. God humbles their pride and scatters them. These stories, though diverse, are all exploring the same basic point. God keeps giving humans the chance to do the right thing with his world, and humans keep ruining it. These stories claim that we live in a good world that we have turned bad. We have all chosen to define good and evil for ourselves. As a result, we all contribute to a world of broken relationships, conflict, violence, and ultimately, death. However, the assumption that this cycle is inevitable is challenged by a thread of hope. God promised that one day, a descendant would come, the wounded victor who will defeat evil at its source. Despite humanity's evil, God is determined to bless and rescue his world. The big question that remains is, what is God going to do? The answer lies in the next story, the hinge that connects the two parts of this book. But for now, we are left to wrestle with the reality of Genesis 1:11. We are invited to see ourselves in these stories and to consider where our own desire for autonomy might be leading us. This reflection is just the beginning of understanding the unified story that leads to Jesus.